As a child, Julie Andrews had a 4-octave voice that a doctor once said belonged in the throat of a grown adult. It made her the biggest movie star in the world. Then a surgeon cut into her throat and destroyed it in an afternoon. She never really sang again. That is the story most people don't know about her. Behind the nanny and the singing governess is a childhood of poverty and fear. There's also a career built and nearly broken by a single image, and a loss most performers would never survive. She came back from it twice. She was born Julia Elizabeth Wells in 1935 in a town in Surrey, southwest of London. Her mother Barbara played the piano. The man she called her father, Ted Wells, taught woodwork and metalwork at a school, and she adored him. For years, she believed he was her dad in every sense of the word. He was the safe person in her early childhood, and she held on to that. The truth was more complicated, and she did not learn it for a long time. Julie had actually been conceived during an affair her mother had with a family friend. Ted Wells was not her biological father. She would only find this out as a teenager, and she found out in the worst possible way. Her parents split up when she was around 7 years old. Her mother then married a Canadian singer named Ted Andrews. He gave Julie the surname the world would come to know. He did not give her much comfort though. Money was tight, and the home was hard. Andrew said later that they lived in a poor, rough part of London, and she called it a very black period in her life. There was worse than instability. In her memoir, written many years later, she described how her stepfather, when he had been drinking, twice tried to climb into her bed. She was frightened enough that she had a bolt fitted to her bedroom door. So the childhood behind the famous voice was not a happy nursery. She learned early to be watchful and to keep herself safe. Some of that steadiness stayed with her for life. The voice, meanwhile, kept growing. By the time she was 10, Julie was performing with her mother and stepfather in variety shows. She was so small she had to stand on a crate to reach the microphone. Then came the moment that marked her as something rare. In 1948, at 13, she sang in a royal variety performance in front of the king and queen. She was the youngest solo performer the show had ever put on that stage. A child from a struggling home was now singing for the royal family. There's a hard fact underneath all of this glamour. By her mid-teens, Julie was the main earner in her family. Her singing paid the bills at home. A teenage girl was carrying grown adults on her shoulders, and she did not really get a choice about it. That responsibility shaped her. She has spoken about a nagging sense that she was never quite allowed to feel good about herself. Her mother once warned her not to dare think she was the best. That line stuck in her, and she carried the doubt for decades. When she was around 19, Broadway called. She crossed the Atlantic to star in a musical called The Boyfriend. She was anxious about leaving the family that leaned on her, but she went. The show was a hit, and New York noticed the young English singer. The people who really noticed were the songwriters Lerner and Lowe. They were building a musical out of a George Bernard Shaw play. They needed a girl who could play a Cockney flower seller who transforms into a lady. They cast Julie as Eliza Doolittle in a show called My Fair Lady. She was 20, and at first, she was drowning. A few days into rehearsal, the director Moss Hart realized she was nowhere near ready. So he did something drastic. He cleared everyone out and took her into an empty theater alone for 2 days. He drilled her line by line, hour after hour, in the dark and quiet of that empty house. It was brutal, and it was private. And it worked. Julie walked out able to play Eliza. My Fair Lady was a sensation. It ran longer than any musical had run on Broadway up to that point. Night after night, Julie carried it opposite Rex Harrison. She was no longer a curiosity from England. A few years later, the same songwriters wrote a part just for her. It was Queen Guinevere in Camelot opposite Richard Burton. The costumes and sets were enormous, and so was the show's reputation. Julie was now at the very top of the theater world. Then Hollywood broke her heart. Warner Brothers decided to make My Fair Lady into a film. Julie had made the role of Eliza famous on stage, and the writer wanted her for the movie. The head of the studio, Jack Warner, said no. Warner did not think she was a big enough name for film. He wanted a proven movie star in the seats, so he cast Audrey Hepburn instead. Hepburn could not really sing the part, and her voice had to be dubbed by someone else. Julie, who could sing it in her sleep, was left out. She took it with grace on the surface. Inside, it must have stung badly. She had done the hard work in that empty theater, and someone else got the movie. But the snub set her free. Walt Disney had seen her on stage and wanted her for a film about a magical English nanny. When she got the offer, she was pregnant, and she tried to turn it down. Disney simply said they would wait for her. The film was Mary Poppins. Julie was luminous in it, funny and warm, and completely in control of every scene. When the awards came around, she won the Oscar for Best Actress. The girl Jack Warner rejected had won Hollywood's top prize on her very first movie. She got her revenge too, and she did it like a lady. She was at the Golden Globes that year with the My Fair Lady filmmaker sitting right there in the room. She thanked the man who had made it all possible, and then she named him Jack Warner. The room understood exactly what she meant. The next year made her enormous. She starred as a singing governess in The Sound of Music. The film was a phenomenon on a scale that is hard to describe now. It became the highest grossing movie ever made and held that record for years. Think about what that meant for Julie. In the space of 2 films, she went from a stage actress to the most bankable star on the planet. Her face was everywhere. Children learned her songs on the other side of the world. She was oddly clear-eyed about the film itself. She admitted she had worried it was too sweet, almost sugary, before she took the part. She knew even then that all that wholesomeness could become a cage. She was right to worry. The very thing that made her famous, that clean and sunny image, started to trap her. Audiences wanted the nanny and the governess forever. They did not want to let her be anything else. She tried to break out and it went badly. In 1968, she made Star, a big, expensive musical that ended up being a notorious flop. Another lavish film attempt was Darling Lily, which failed as well soon after. For a while, the woman who could do no wrong could suddenly do very little right. Her way out of the cage came through the man she would eventually marry. His name was Blake Edwards, a film director with a sharp, dark sense of humor. He looked at Julie's squeaky clean image and decided to play with it on screen. He was not gentle about it, and she loved that. In one of his films, a savage comedy about Hollywood, he had her play a wholesome actress who was pushed to bare her chest for a movie. And then Julie, the nanny, the governess, actually did the scene topless. It was a deliberate wink at everything the public thought she was. A late-night host joked that she had proved the Hills were still alive. Dan Edwards gave her the role that showed her real range. In Victor Victoria, she played a woman pretending to be a man who performs as a woman on stage in Old Paris. It was clever and funny and completely against type. It earned her another Oscar nomination and reminded everyone she was an actress, not a postcard. She said she would be a fool to stay Mary Poppins her whole life. She knew people would get bored, and she knew she would too. So she kept moving. Her personal life ran alongside all of it, with its own ups and downs. Her first marriage was to a designer named Tony Walton, whom she had known since she was a girl. They had a daughter named Emma. The marriage did not last, but the friendship did, right up until his death many years later. But Blake Edwards was the great love of her life. They were married for 41 years until he died in 2010. She called it, simply, a love story. It was not always an easy one. Edwards struggled with depression and long stretches of illness and exhaustion. Julie has written about the emotional chaos he carried inside him. She stayed, and she loved him through it, and they built a real partnership at home and at work. Together they raised his children and 2 little girls they adopted from Vietnam during the war there. She also had one of the great friendships of show business. She and the comedian Carol Burnett met as young women and simply clicked. Burnett has said she brings out the naughty, bawdy side of the very proper Julie Andrews. That friendship has lasted more than 60 years. Through all of this, Julie was quietly doing the work of holding herself together. She spent years in therapy, and she has said it more or less saved her life. She talks about arriving in Hollywood feeling like a small-town English girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The confident star the public saw was often unsure of herself underneath. Now we come to the hardest part of her story. In the 1990s, she was back on Broadway singing in the stage version of Victor Victoria 8 times a week. That kind of schedule is punishing for any voice. Hers began to give her trouble. Doctors told her she had something on her vocal cords that needed removing. The reports over the years have called it different things: a nodule, a polyp, a small cyst, a weak spot. Whatever the right word, she understood it to be harmless. She was told this was a routine procedure. In the summer of 1997, she went in for surgery on her throat. She expected to heal up and go back to singing. Instead, she woke up and her singing voice was simply gone. The 4-octave instrument that had carried her whole life had been destroyed on the operating table. Her voice was not just a talent. It was how she had fed her family as a child, how she had become a star, how she understood who she was. She said afterward that she felt she had lost her identity and she fell into a depression. Her husband spoke about it at the time with real grief. He said he did not think she would ever sing again, and he called it an absolute tragedy. He was right about the singing. It did not come back. She went to court over it. She sued the hospital and the doctors, saying she had never been warned that the operation could permanently wreck her voice. She said singing had been a cherished gift and that losing it was a devastating blow. The case was settled quietly. I want to be careful here because a lot of nonsense gets repeated about this. You will see a specific huge dollar figure thrown around for that settlement. The honest answer is that the terms were kept private and never announced. Nobody reporting responsibly at the time knew the number, and neither do we. What we do know is what she did next. She could have vanished. A person who has lost a thing that defined them would be forgiven for going quiet. Julie Andrews did the opposite. Later surgeons managed to repair her speaking voice, though never her singing. So she leaned into the voice she still had. She narrated films and played queens and grandmothers. She let that warm, familiar speaking voice become a whole second career. She also became a writer, and a very successful one. Working closely with her daughter Emma, she wrote children's books, many of them bestsellers. It turned out the woman who had sung to children across the world could tell them stories on the page too. She had lost one way of reaching them and simply found another. In recent years, a new generation met her without even seeing her face. She is the voice of the gossipy narrator in the hit series Bridgerton. Young people who have never watched The Sound of Music know her from that sly, knowing voice on their screens. In 2025, she finally won an Emmy for it. In the autumn of 2025, she turned 90 years old. She is still working, still narrating, still writing books with her daughter. She has said that the best thing she can leave behind is simply having made someone's day a little better. Coming from a woman who sang to the whole world and then lost the ability to sing, that is a quietly astonishing thing to want.